baie welkom. Dis lekker om vanoggend saam met jou te kan kuier. Ons is opgewonde oor dit wat die Here besig is om in ons nuwe reeks te doen, wat hy in my lewe doen, wat hy in jou lewe doen, en dit is vir ons lekker om net vanoggend saam met jou te kan kuier daar waar jy is. En ek vertrou dat vandag se boodskap jou gaan uitdaag en vir jou gaan seën en vir jou gaan tot nuwe hoogtes bring in hierdie volgende week wat voor ons lê. Kan ek vir jou bid voordat ons verder gaan? Here Jesus, dankie vir 'n wonderlike geleentheid om U naam te mag aanroep, om deel te wees van U koninkryk, om deel te wees van 'n gemeente waar ons groei elke dag en betrokke is in mekaar se lewens. En ek wil kom bid dat U in hierdie dag met ons sal kom ontmoet. Dat ons iets uit hierdie diens sal kry, iets met die geselskie met Richard en Dai, of iets uit die boodskap uit, of iets met die musiek, wat ons kan vat in hierdie week, en wat ons lewens gaan verander. En ons kom bid dat U vir ons sal kom onderneem en sal kom voorsien in hierdie week. Ons bid dit in die wonderlike naam. Amen. Well, good morning and welcome to church this morning. Trust you had a brilliant week, and this day is just a celebration of the week you had. And we are so glad that you are tuned in, and just happy to spend a few minutes with you. This morning we are visiting with Richard and Di Coley from Bridge Church. Now Richard and Di came into Newcastle, and they just crawl into everybody's hearts and lives, and they just were a blessing to Newcastle. But as we know, there's a time to come and there's a time to go, and there's a season for everything if you want to get biblical now. Mm-hmm. And your season is ending soon.
Right.
So tell us, how long have you been in Bridge?
So we've been in Newcastle and in Bridge Church now for 12 years. That was in November last year. So yeah, 12 years.
12 years. And now you're handing over to Dustin. I've met him, a nice young man, but he's not you. He's got different.
He's got a better beard than I have and a bit more hair.
A bit more hair. Yeah. But a nice chap.
Wonderful guy, and his wife Sarah, I don't think you've met. They're a great couple.
Okay. So are you happy to just hand over and take your hands off?
Yes, absolutely. And the reason for that also, Frans, is that it was God actually showed us very clearly. This is not in the script, obviously, but it was a very interesting thing. Is one morning in our quiet times, Di and I have our time with the Lord in separate rooms. And God spoke to me very clearly about the fact that Dustin and Sarah are the ones to take over the church. And so after we came out of our quiet times, I said to Di, guess what God told me this morning? And she said to me,
guess what God told me this morning?
He told us both at the same time that Dustin and Sarah were to take over from us. It was a very clear confirmation.
Okay. What were some of the highlights for you both in your church journey in this 12 years?
Oh, we've agreed that I'll share those with you. First of all, just to say, of course, for anybody in the ministry and anybody who's a believer, to see people come to know the Lord is the greatest highlight of all. And then to see their lives actually change. Because as Angus Buchan says, no change, no Jesus. And so we've seen a fair amount of that, not as much as we would have hoped, but it's been a highlight to see that. And then to see people growing. We've done quite a lot of ministry into people's lives who've come out of difficult pasts, had difficult experiences either in their home childhood or maybe other congregations and churches, and just to see them let go of all that stuff and move on and grow in their faith and grow in their ability to serve the Lord and in their personal relationship with Him. And then lastly, we want to say, the most awesome highlight was when Richard had cancer and we experienced the love and support of the people in our church. It was just amazing. We could have never hoped for such a sense of being supported and carried through both incidences that we felt. And so that is an absolute highlight for us.
Okay. And some of the challenges
Yeah, France, it's, I think when we look at the highlights, I was struggling to think of the challenges, but of course there were challenges. I think the big challenge was when we got to Newcastle. We took over a broken church. There were 25 people there. They were hurting. They were disillusioned. And so our challenge was to rescue that. And of course, we came here because, again, God spoke to us and said, Newcastle is your promised land. You must go there. But from a straight financial point of view, if you look at it and you take over a church with 25 people, you think, how on earth are we going to get by financially? The church that sent us promised us support for 3 months, and then we were on our own. And so it's amazing what God did. The people who left the church came back. So that was one of the challenges. Obviously, facing the challenge of cancer was twice. That was a challenge, but we'll deal more with the cancer journey a little bit later. And then one of the things that we discerned when we got here, and it's a big challenge, I believe it's has not been a challenge for me, but actually I think it's a challenge for the Church of Newcastle, is we picked up in this town something that we've never seen in any other town before, and that is that there's a spirit of bitterness and unforgiveness in this town, more so than any other town that we've experienced. And so with a lot of people that have joined us and who've needed to deal with the past, those issues always come up. And in fact, that was part of the split in Bridge Church when we picked it up. There was bitterness and unforgiveness. I do believe in our church. We've dealt with it. It's a long journey on its own, so we can't go into the details of that now. I happily share it with anybody who wants to know more about that. So that was a challenge, and I think, of course, finance, you will know as a pastor as well, finance is always a challenge. There's more that you want to do, and there's never enough money to get done what you'd like to do. But God is our provider, and I think sometimes the challenge is maybe going on inside my head because I'm thinking too far ahead of God. So I would think that probably summarizes our challenges.
So it's basically the same that every other pastor is experiencing. You guys also experience the same thing. Okay. And let's move on to the cancer journey you had. You know, we walked that road with you and just experiencing all the time that in this time that you were still close to the Lord, and you too, it was just wow. And please share with us, both of you, you know, what your experiences were.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I think I'd like to say in the beginning, those of us who are of my age, younger guys won't know this, but we had to do military service in the old days. And there was always this old saying that everybody who'd been in the army used to say, I'm so glad I went to the army. It was a great experience, but I never want to do it again. And that's actually my take on cancer. I'm actually very glad I had it, and both times. And of course, my comment afterwards is I never want to go through it again. So it was really tough. But let me just very briefly touch on the first bout of cancer that I had. And for me, the amazing thing was we were still a small, struggling church. I got cancer 6 months. I was diagnosed with cancer, rather, 6 months after we got here. And it was like a shock for all of us. We've just got here to Newcastle. It's a small congregation, and we need to get this thing going. How can we do it when I'm being treated for cancer? Because I was absolutely flattened by the chemotherapy. And here's the miracle. Our church doubled in numbers during my time of treatment with cancer. And for me, the message from God to me was very clear. Is, son, I don't really need you. I just need somebody to represent me. But the work is all mine. It's not yours. So it was a very humbling thing, and yet it was an incredible highlight for us. It was amazing. So church doubled in size. We must just represent Jesus as best we can.
We were fortunate with the first bout of cancer that Richard was able to have his treatment in Newcastle. At that time, the cancer centre was still open, the Hopeland Centre. So although Richard was knocked sideways every time he had his treatment, at least he wasn't away from home. So he was still preaching. And then myself and some of our other leaders who preached, we used to take turns. So Rich would preach every 3 or 4 weeks, and the rest of us would take a turn in between. So actually, in spite of how he felt, he still managed to lead the church and be there at every service, whether he was preaching or not. And although he was terribly weak, every time he stood up to preach, he had the strength. And he would do a whole preach, not a 10-minute one. You know, some men like to preach. And, and he had the energy. He had to sit down immediately afterwards, and if people wanted prayer, they would have to come and sit in front of him. But he managed to keep going at what he felt called to do, which was just wonderful.
There's some very interesting things. This might take longer than 15 minutes. You guys might have to edit it. But obviously, when I was diagnosed with cancer, what's the first thing I did was go to the Lord and say, Father, you can heal me in an instant, and I'm asking you for healing. And I felt God say to me, Richard, I want you to walk this whole journey of cancer because I want you to show your church how to cope with suffering. Those were very clear words to me. And so that's what we did. Now, here's the very interesting thing. Very few people in Newcastle know this. When I had finished my 8 months of treatment of cancer, and I was finished, Di had a lump under her arm. And she went for a scan. Was it called a scan or a mammogram? Yeah. And of course, these surgeons are used to looking at these things, and they scanned and did whatever. And he just shook his head. He called in the other consultants, and their words to each other was, you can see this is cancer. So we called our leaders together that evening. We anointed her with oil, and we prayed for her. And then you went in for the autopsy. And
not the autopsy, doll, I was still alive.
Sorry, what's called a what?
The biopsy.
She survived the biopsy. And they couldn't wait to tell her, you're clear, it's not cancer. I'm absolutely convinced that God healed her instantly from cancer. Now, the interesting thing is, the whole church remembers my cancer journey. Nobody remembers that Di was healed from cancer. And there's a great message in this. You know, that everybody, whoever you are and wherever you are, people watch you when you're suffering. And how you take your suffering is actually an incredible testimony. And so here's an amazing testimony of God's healing power. Here's an amazing testimony of God's restorative power. And that's the one they remembered because I suffered. And that's a message for everybody. We often wonder, why does God do this and why does God do that? But He wants us to be a living testimony for Him. And so maybe it's, France, to make a long story short, second bout of cancer, huge amount of suffering. Actually, in the second bout, Jesus appeared to me in spirit when I was in hospital on my first night. And there's a long story to it, but just this, that He said, Richard, I'm in the boat with you, and you're going to come through this. And so I knew God had spoken. I knew I wasn't going to die. And there were 2 occasions when I was close to death. I never doubted for a minute that I would survive, and I did. And here I am telling the story. I know I've got work to do. Even when I leave Newcastle, leaving Dustin and Sarah, actually, His word to me is, I'm taking you elsewhere. You've got work to do.
And in this second lot of cancer, you also had to move premises. So you were kind of finishing off and all the stress of that rental and that thing, and now you have to look for a new place. And
yeah, I don't want to say too much about it because I don't want to say bad things about anybody. But let's say God was in it. I was in the middle of treatment in hospital in Durban when I got the phone call from my finance board to say, we've been given notice and we've got, I think it was 4 weeks to get out.
1 month.
1 month to get out. We did. It was a very good move. It brought the finest out in the congregation. It united us like anything. And I think you've seen the place. It's beautiful.
Yeah.
God was with us. He is so with us. It's wonderful. And maybe if I can say something, because people listen to this very often, friends, when you hit a time of real suffering, people ask the question, am I being punished by God because of something I did? And I want you to know that if you're a Christian, God does not punish you because Jesus took your punishment. What He does allow is for us to go through trials. And it's how we face the trials that He wants for us to realize and for us to grow in it. And you'll find that all over New Testament scripture. I'll leave it to your able pastor to give you some teachings on suffering. But please remember, you are never punished by God. Jesus took your punishment.
Well, it's amazing to see, there's a lot of people and they always need some trauma in their life to operate. And if there's no trauma, it's like, what's wrong? Same with you. I mean, nobody remembers your cancer story.
But at that time, it was like the last straw for me. We'd been through so much, and we were so exhausted. And I just really collapsed in a heap. I couldn't believe that this would happen, or just that it was happening. But those men who prayed for me prayed with such faith that I immediately felt better. And the very day after I had the biopsy, I had an appointment for about 2 days hence to see the surgeon who did the biopsy. And he couldn't wait to tell me. He phoned me. He said, you must come and see me on Wednesday, but I'm telling you right now, there's no cancer. And so I could tell that he was just as amazed as anybody. And God is wonderful. He deals with us in the way that we need at that time. I want to just say, when Richard was diagnosed with the second time, he'd gone into hospital because he couldn't walk almost. His back was in such pain. And so we thought he was going to have a back operation. And they did an MRI, and then they hunted, and then they said, no, we need another MRI. So they did another one straight away, a few hours later. And we're thinking, what's going on? And it turned out to be cancer, all in his spine. And that's why he couldn't walk. But they caught it exactly in time. Because they didn't know they couldn't treat the cancer, because they didn't know what kind of cancer it was, and you never treat cancer just arbitrarily. And so they gave him a massive dose of cortisone.
But that's more, otherwise we can go on forever and ever.
But I just want to say, Richard could walk the next morning.
Yeah.
And the joy that was in our hearts, because in that night, God or Jesus appeared to Richard. And so from the next morning, we had absolute assurance that he was going to be absolutely fine. And we had this amazing joy. And we were rebuked a number of times for making too much noise in the ward, because he was in a ward with 3 other very sick men. But the laughter and the prayer meetings, every time someone came to visit, we had another prayer meeting. So it was just a wonderful time with God.
And I'm so happy that you are healed. I'm very sad to see you go. We've had a number of occasions we did a couple of things together, and you guys are just such a delight. And I'm so glad that you guys came into our lives.
Yes.
And may God bless you.
Thank you.
Where are you guys going?
Well, we believe God's called us back to Howick, where we came from. We've got a huge network of friends, and we've got family in Howick. And Di's mum is in Howick, and she needs Di right now. She's going into dementia and needs some love and support.
Any last minute advice for young pastors or pastors' wives?
Yes, we do. I think sometimes pastors put a huge amount of pressure on themselves in terms of performance and in presenting themselves well. And my research and whatever tells me that's very low down on the scale of needs in the church. So I've actually got something that God showed me. I'm going to show it to the camera. And I'm going to tell people, it's not just the young pastors. You owe it to your church to be, I think it says, filled with the Holy Spirit. You owe it to your church
To be whole and happy.
to be whole and happy. You owe it to your church to love everybody, and you owe it to your church to seem to have time for everybody. That is probably the most important thing that a pastor needs to be, because people look to you for those things. And a regular, disciplined time spent with Jesus is just so important on a daily basis. That way your well never runs dry. I want to tell you something, Frans. I find it amazing because you hear of pastors burn out. But in 12 years in Newcastle, having to preach on, obviously, not every Sunday, but very regularly, I have never once battled to come up with a message. Not once in 12 years. Because God has put stuff on my heart all the time. And so I'm not saying I'm amazing. What I'm saying is Jesus is amazing. Because when you listen to Him, He speaks. And I have full confidence that every time I've preached, and I say this in all humility, I believe it was the word of the Lord for the time. Because of that simple process. Stay connected to Jesus. I think every Christian should be doing that, not just pastors, but it's a really good one for pastors. Because what you are, your church catches from you. So, there it is, my free advice for every young budding pastor.
Great.
Yeah.
Do you have any advice for pastors' wives in the ministry?
Yes, I just to say that is very true, what Richard has just shared. I didn't manage it so well as Richard did. I ended up with burnout twice, taking on other people's burdens and being a woman trying to fix it. And so just to say, your job is to support your husband. Your job is to be loving, kind, there for other people, but don't try and carry their burdens. You will be crushed under that load.
One last question, and this was not in any questions I've sent to you. You know, the church always expects the pastor's wife to be the best koeksister bak tannie. Can you bake koeksisters?
Nee, jammer man, jammer. I can't bake a koeksister. In fact, I don't like to bake anything that has to rise more than about 1 centimeter.
Okay.
So I stick with muffins and things like that.
Okay.
She makes a good cup of tea.
That's important.
I can bake, but just not, I'm not in that league.
Great. Just want to take the pressure off those ladies that are in a church, especially the Afrikaans churches. If you can't bake a proper koeksister, then you're not a decent pastor's wife. So that's. But Richard, thank you so much for sharing with us this morning. And may the Lord really, really bless you and keep you and guide you and help you through with your mother. And thank you so much for the friendship and the time that we could spend together. And may the Lord bless your church as well, and for Dustin, that it will really go well.
Yes.
So thanks a million. And
thank you. It's been an honor.
I searched the world, but it couldn't fill me. Man's empty praise and pleasures that fade are never enough. Then you came along and put me back together. And every desire is now satisfied here in your love. Oh, there's nothing better than you. There's nothing better than you, Lord. There's nothing is better than you. Not afraid to show you my weakness, my failures and flaws. Lord, you see there's nothing better than you, Lord. There's nothing, nothing is better than you. Nothing better than you, Lord. There's nothing better than you, Lord. There's nothing, nothing is better than you. You turn graves into gardens. You turn bones into armies. You turn seas into highways. You're the only one who can. You're the only one who can. You're the only one who can.
Welkom terug. Dis preek nommer 2 in ons reeks wat sê staan op. En volgende wil ek met jou gesels oor die gebreekte blompot syndroom. Nou ons almal lewe met 'n gebreekte blompot in ons lewe. Nou voordat jy van kanaal wil verander of my wil afsit, luister net gou hierna. By jou voordeur staan daar 'n blompot en die blompot het gebreek watter rede ook al dit was dit die kinders, was dit die tuinbestuurder, was dit ouderdom, was dit 'n fout, was dit per ongeluk, maar die blompot het gebreek. In die eerste dag sê jy, weet jy wat, ek moet my ander blompot kry en ek moet hierdie blompot vervang, want dit lyk nie mooi nie, dit is nie nice nie, en almal wat hier gaan kom, gaan dit sien. En so gaan die eerste week verby en jy sê Vrydagmiddag, weet jy wat, Saterdagoggend gaan ek dit doen, en die lewe gebeur, en nou is dit 3 maande later. En daardie blompot is nog steeds gebreek by jou voordeur. En mense kom vir jou kuier en hulle sien die gebreekte blompot en hulle sê niks nie want hulle dink jy weet van dit en jy gaan dit doen en dit is okay want hulle wil nie inmeng nie. Maar ons almal het in ons lewens 'n gebreekte blompot, iets wat daar staan wat jou remind van ek het nodig om dit uit te sorteer, ek het nodig om dit reg te maak, ek het nodig om dit weg te vat. Maar na 3 maande of so, dan sien jy nie meer hierdie gebreekte blompot raak nie. Hy is nog steeds daar, maar jy sien dit nie raak nie. En dit begin vir jou 'n nuwe normaal te word. Ag, dit moet so wees, ek sal nog daarby uitkom. En so gaan ons lewens aan. Maar hierdie nuwe normaal bly daar vir 'n jaar of 2 of dalk word dit hoe jou lewe nou maar is met hierdie gebreekte blompot. 'n Gebreekte blompot hoef nie net 'n gebreekte blompot te wees nie. Dit kan verskeie goeders wees in jou lewe. Jy kon nog altyd goed gedoen het in jou finansies kon nog altyd goed gewees het. Al jou rekeninge is altyd betaal, jy het geld in die bank gehad, tot op 'n dag dat jy of jou vrou julle werk verloor. En jy begin agterraak op die huispaemente en jy's te skaam om dit te erken en jy begin te jok daaroor en jy raak net verder agter met die skoolfonds en jou motorpaemente tot op 'n dag wat jy begin jok oor die rede hoekom jy nie betaal nie. En dit begin jou nuwe normaal te raak. Ons lewe so in skuld, ons lewe so oor ons means of verby ons means dat dit ons nuwe normaal raak. Ons spandeer nie binne in ons begroting nie en dit raak 'n probleem, maar hierdie probleem raak ons nuwe normaal. En dis hoe ons dan optree en funksioneer en begin dink volgens ons nuwe raamwerk. Jy wil graag regmaak, jy wil graag uit hierdie situasie kom. Maar die besluite wat jy neem telke male maak dat jy net dieper en dieper in hierdie sinkgat inval en jy kom nie daaruit nie. Jou verhouding met jou ouers, jou verhouding met jou man, jou verhouding met jou kinders, jou verhouding met jou werksmense, die kwaliteit van werk wat jy doen. Wat is jou gebreekte blompot vanoggend? Dink gou daaroor. En as jy sukkel, pos net gou hierdie video en vra vir die Here om vir jou te wys, vir jou te openbaar, wat jou gebreekte blompot vanoggend is. Want sien, hierdie boodskap is vir jou. Hierdie boodskap het nodig om ons lewens te verander. Maar ons moet op 'n punt kom wat ons besef, daai nuwe normaal van my, wat dalk nou al 'n ou normaal is nie so normaal soos wat ons dink dit is nie. Een van die vyand se grootste wapens is geestelike misleiding. En hy sit dalk nou op jou skouer en hy sê vir jou, weet jy wat, dis nie so erg nie. Almal doen dit. Moenie daaroor stres nie, moenie daaroor worry nie. Almal doen dit. Dit is oukei. Is dit regtig oukei? Johannes 10, vers 10 sê vir ons die volgende. En die dief kom vir niks anders as om te steel, dood te maak en te vernietig. Ek het gekom sodat julle lewe kan hê, sodat hulle dit oorvloedig het. Sien, hierdie misleiding wat die vyand by ons mee kom, wat sê, hierdie normaal van jou is eintlik oukei, steel by ons. Dit maak dat ons minder lewe as wat ons veronderstel is om te lewe. Hierdie leuns wat ons glo, steel by ons. Jesus kom vanoggend by jou en kom by my en hy sê, ek het gekom sodat julle lewe in oorvloed kan hê. Ek het gekom sodat julle lewe in oorvloed kan hê. Die Grieks is daar twee woorde vir lewe. Die eerste ene is bios. Ek lewe fisies. Maar dan is daar ook 'n tweede een, zoe. Lewe saam met God. En dis waarvan hierdie lewe praat, 'n lewe saam met God. En dit is wat God uitnooi vir jou en sê, kom vanoggend. Kom lewe saam met my. Ek wil vir jou 'n lewe saam met my in oorvloed gee. Daar is soveel normaal in ons samelewing. Gaan Google 'n bietjie new normal. En alles het te doen met COVID. Alles het te doen met maskers dra en social distancing en hande was en dis eintlik snaaks om daarna te kyk. Maar net so is dit snaaks wanneer ons in mekaar se lewens begin inkyk en sien die nuwe normaal wat ons aanvaar as normaal, wat eintlik nie so normaal is nie. Ons samelewing se nuwe normaal is eintlik nie so normaal nie. 'n paar jaar terug sou dit ongehoord gewees het vir ons om 'n sekere klomp goed te doen. Maar vandag is dit sosiaal aanvaarbaar. Daar's 'n nuwe normaal wat geskep is. Maar God kom en hy daag uit en hy sê, ek wil hê dat jy lewe in oorvloed sal hê. Glo in my, volg my. Ek wil hê dat jy moet opstaan uit daai so-called new normal van jou en 'n verskil maak. Baie gou saam met my na Johannes hoofstuk 4. En terwyl jy soontoe blaai, wil ek vir 'n bietjie agtergrond gee oor hierdie gedeelte. Jesus is op reis terug van Judea af na Galilea toe. En op pad terug toe reis hy deur Samaria. Nou Samaria was een van daai plekke wat die Jode nie regtig na toe wou gaan nie, want daar was 'n klomp baster mense wat daar gebly het. En ons meng mos nie met mense wat nie suiwer Joodse afkoms het nie. En toe hulle in die middel van die dag daar aankom, gaan Jesus na 'n put toe en hy kry 'n vrou by die put en hy vra vir haar, kan ek bietjie water kry? Nou daar's 'n paar goeters wat heeltemal nie so normaal is aan die vrou wat in die middel van die dag by die put is nie, want sien, die mense wat na skape en bokke en kamele gekyk het vroeg in die oggend en laat middag na die put toe gegaan om water te gee. So wat soek die vrou in die middel van die dag wat nie normaal is nie by die put? Die rede vir dit was, sy het alreeds 5 mans gehad. En die 6de by wie sy nou is ook nie eintlik haar man nie. En sy het hierdie reputasie op die dorp gehad en sy het nie eintlik vriende gehad nie, want sy het in losbandigheid gelewe, maar dit was haar normaal gewees. As gevolg van die gebrokenheid in haar lewe, as gevolg van die sonde in haar lewe, het sy geen vriende nie. En ons kan baie keer identifiseer met dit. As gevolg van die nuwe normaal in ons lewe, het ons minder vriende, het ons minder mense wat oor ons omgee. Jy is ongelukkig, jy val van verhouding na verhouding, jy het nie genoeg geld nie, en jou dors word net nie geles nie. Kyk wat sê Jesus vir haar, Johannes 14, vers 13 en 14. Jesus antwoord haar, elkeen wat van hierdie water drink, sal weer dors word. Wie egter van die water drink wat ek hom gee, sal nimmer as te nooit weer dors word nie. Maar sien, sy moes op 'n punt kom, en dis my eerste punt. Ons het nodig om op 'n punt te kom waar ons erken, ons het dors. Ons het 'n behoefte. Ons het nodig om Jesus in ons lewe te kry. Johannes 14 vers 15 sê, die vrou sê toe vir hom, meneer, gee my van hierdie water. Sien, sy het besef, sy het water nodig, sodat ek nie weer dors word nie, en hierheen hoef te kom om water te skep nie. Sy erken, sy is dors. Sy erken, sy het water nodig. Sy dalk nie heeltemal verstaan wat hierdie water is, wat Jesus van praat nie. Maar sy het erken, sy het Jesus nodig. Ons moet verantwoordelikheid aanvaar vir ons situasie. Ons moet erken, voordat ons kan opstaan. Ons moet erken, daar's 'n fout, daar's 'n probleem. Ons moet erken, ons sit, voordat ons kan opstaan. Solank as wat jy dit ontken, bly daai gebreekte blompot voor jou deur. Solank as wat jy sê, daar is nie fout met my nie, alles is okay, ek kan dit handle. Solank gaan jy nie verander nie. Gaan jy nie besef dat jy nodig het om op te staan nie. Op hierdie oomblik is daar so groot polemiek rondom WhatsApp. Moet ek dit delete? Moet ek dit hou? Gaan al my inligting steel? Gaan dit... Weet jy wat? Voordat jy dit delete, daar is 'n cool funksie op WhatsApp. Send my location. Wanneer jy vir iemand 'n location pin stuur, dan kan hy presies dit in sy foon op daai link klik en hy gaan daar uitkom. No questions asked. Ons lewe met 'n location pin van ons lewe. Ons weet waar ons moet uitkom, ons weet waar Jesus ons wil hê, maar ons kom nie daar uit nie, want ons loop ons eie pad, ons los ons eie gebreekte blompotte voor ons deur. In die GPS sê kort, recalculating, en ons kom nie op die punt uit waar God ons kan gebruik nie, want ons lewe recalculate elke keer 'n ander roete, omrede ons nie wil erken dat daar is 'n gebreekte blompot op ons stoep nie. Ons kan nie opstaan en die eerste tree gee nie, want ons het nog 'n gebreekte blompot op ons stoep, en ons GPS van ons lewe sê recalculating. Kom ons kyk volgend na ons lewe, en ons druk daai button wat sê location. En kom ons kyk, waar is ons volgend? Hoe lyk ons lewe? En kom ons begin van daar af, om God te vertrou, dat ons kan opstaan van ons current location af, en 'n verskil begin maak. Die tweede punt wat ek by wil uitkom is, ons het waarheid nodig om te verander. Dis iets wat mense nogal opval in die verhaal van hierdie vrou is, niks wat Jesus vir haar gesê het, word gesugarcoat nie. En die vrou erken dat sy 'n gebreekte blompot op haar stoep het. Sy erken dat sy al 5 mans gehad het, en die 16 is ook nie eintlik haar man nie. Nou die slim mense sê dat daar's 3 goed wat maak dat ons van van verander, ons menslike natuur verander. Die eerste een is, pyn laat jou verander. Nou, ek weet nie wie van julle het al 'n sciatic nerve gehad wat vastknyp nie, maar daai ding is nogal seer. As jy opstaan, as jy loop, as jy sit, as jy lê, die ding is seer. En wanneer daai ding so seer word, en pille nie meer help nie, en dan begin jy alternatiewe soek, om van hierdie pyn ontslae te raak. En die pyn maak dat jy dikwels permanent 'n leefstylverandering moet maak, sodat jy nie pyn het nie. Maar pyn is een van daai motivators wat maak dat jy verander. Onthou jy toe jy 'n kind was, en jy iets gedoen het wat jy nie moes gedoen het, en jy maat nou al 10 keer vir jou gesê, moenie, Frans, moenie, jy gaan slaag kry, Frans, moenie. Wat gebeur? Op 'n stadium gaan jy pyn ervaar. En dit gaan maak dat jy dit nie weer doen nie. Daar's 'n tweede rede wat maak dat jy verander. Onthou jy toe in die weermag was, die eerste dag toe jy daar gekom het, en jy het jou kiet gekry, en jy het met hierdie trommel, en hierdie klomp goed gestaan, en in 'n lang ry daar voor die barbershop gaan aantree, en jy het gaan sit, en die barber het nie vir jou gevra, hoe sny ek jou hare nie? Hy het net gegaan en fisies nommer 1 kammetjie gevat, voorin gedruk en agteruit getrek, en dis hoe lank jou hare was. Jy kon nie sê, short on the top and leave a little bit on the side nie. Nee, dis nommer 1 van voor tot agteruit. Jy het nie 'n keuse gehad nie. Almal het dit gedoen. Maar albei hierdie eerste 2 goeters laat nie altyd 'n permanente verandering teweeg in jou menslike natuur nie. Want sien, dit word half 'n bietjie op jou geforseer. Daar's geen keuse aan betrokke nie. Die een wat die meeste verandering teweegbring is wanneer jy self kies om te verander. Jy het genoeg waarheid wat in jou lewe inkom. Jy sien dat te veel chocolates en sweets en gaskoeldrank en suiker en al daai goeie sleg is vir jou lewe. En jy besluit om gesonder te eet, vroeër te gaan slaap, meer te begin oefen. Want jy het meer waarheid wat in jou lewe inkom. En jy het 'n meer ingeligte besluit wat jy kan neem. Sien, jy kies om te verander. Jesus het vir haar gesê, gaan roep jou man en kom dan terug hiernatoe. En die vrou het dadelik gereageer en gesê, ek het nie 'n man nie. Sien, die current location van hoe haar lewe is, het na haar toe teruggekom. En ons het baie keer sulke waarheidsoomblikke in ons lewe nodig, dat ons genoeg inligting oor onsself kan kry, sodat ons kan verander. Waarheidsoomblikke kom dalk onverwags. Iemand sterf, jy is in 'n motorongeluk, jy is siek, jy gaan deur 'n egskeiding, jy word insolvent verklaar, daar is 'n groot pandemie en ons het nodig om al die feite te kry. Partykeer kom dit wanneer jy met 'n goeie vriend of met 'n geestelike leier gesels. En die waarheid val op jou skouers neer, is soos 'n oop boek wat val en jy besef, dit is my waarheid, ek het nodig om te verander. Jakob het op 'n plek in sy lewe gekom waar hy 'n droom gehad het. Toe hy wakker word, toe sê hy, waarlik waar, die Here was hier. Hoe lyk jou current location vanoggend? Het die Here in jou lewe ingekom en op jou lewe kom druk en gesê, weet jy wat? Dis waar jy is. Hier is al die feite. Jy het nodig om te besluit om op te staan. Jy kan aanhou ploeter hierso, of jy kan besluit om op te staan. Nooi God se waarheid in jou lewe in. Daardie waarheid wat jou vry maak om te kan opstaan. Beweeg, staan op en ontmoet die watergewer. Hierdie een gesprek met Jesus het haar totale lewe verander. Glo jy vanoggend in die krag van God? Glo jy dat hy jou kan vrymaak? Glo jy dat hy jou kan staande hou? Glo jy dat hy jou lewe kan verander? Weet jy wat? Hierdie vrou het opgestaan. Sy het opgestaan. Daar waar sy verwerp is uit die samelewing en 5 mans gehad het, die 16 is nie eintlik haar man nie, het sy besluit om op te staan en terug te gaan na daar waar sy vandaan kom, om 'n getuie te wees. Gaan lees dit. Johannes 4, vers 39. En baie van die Samaritane uit daardie stad het in hom geglo oor die woord van die vrou wat getuig het. Daai vrou wat Jesus by die put gekry het met haar nuwe normaal, wat in die middel van die dag by die put gaan sit, wat 'n uitgeworpene was, wat geen aansien gehad het nie. Nadat Jesus haar aangeraak het en sy opgestaan het van daai put af en teruggegaan het en begin regmaak het begin getuig. En Johannes 4 vers 39 sê, en baie Samaritane uit daardie stad het in hom geglo, as gevolg van dit wat sy gesê het. Hoe lyk dit met jou lewe vanoggend? Hoe lyk dit met ons lewe? Ons het 'n nuwe normaal, wat kind of aanvaarbaar is, maar wat vir Jesus glad nie aanvaarbaar is nie. En vanoggend kom gooi jy hierdie boek so oop en jy sien jou lewe en jy sien wat nodig is om te verander. En wat die verskil gaan maak is dat jy gaan opstaan. As jy gaan opstaan en dit verander, gaan dit verander. Anderster gaan dit presies dieselfde bly. En niemand gaan van Jesus weet nie, omrede jy besluit het om stil te bly. Omrede jy besluit het om te bly sit. Ons het nodig om op te staan, om 'n verskil te maak. Mag jy vanoggend besef hoe dors jy werklik het. Mag jy vanoggend besef dat jy nodig het om heel te word. Dat jy iets nodig het om te doen aan daai gebreekte blompot. Luister na Jesaja 55 vers 1. Dit sê, o almal wat dors het, kom na die waters, en wie geen geld het nie, kom koop en eet. Ja, kom, koop sonder geld en sonder prys, wyn en melk. Waarom weeg julle geld af vir wat geen brood is nie, en julle arbeid vir wat nie kan versadig nie? Luister aandagtig na my, en eet die goeie, en laat julle siel hom in vettigheid verlustig. Neig julle oor en kom na my toe. Luister en julle siel sal lewe. Wil jy nie vanoggend opstaan en vir Jesus 'n kans gee in jou lewe nie? Kom ons bid saam. Here Jesus, dankie vir hierdie oggend. Dankie vir hierdie waarheid wat na ons toe kom en dat ons mag weet dat U nog steeds in beheer is en dat ons kan opstaan. Kom gee vir ons al die waarheid vanoggend. Kom breek dit vir ons oop, sodat ons met 'n nuwe normaal na U sal kyk. Dat ons U normaal as die normaal van ons lewe sal vat. Ek kom bid vir hulle wat by die huis sit vanoggend, wat nodig het om die location van hulle lewe te bestudeer en te kyk waar hulle is. Kom vanoggend en word U verheerlik. Ons vra dit in die wonderlike naam alleen. Amen.